Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel NPA Discovery, where we go beyond the glamorous photographs, television credits, and carefully constructed celebrity images to discover the complicated human stories behind some of Hollywood's most unforgettable personalities. Today, we are looking at the remarkable and heartbreaking life of Dak Rambo. And if you only remember him as a handsome television actor from shows like Dallas, then the full story may surprise you. Because behind the smile, the tailored suits, and the image of a confident television heartthrob was a man who experienced an extraordinary series of emotional blows. He lost the person who had shared his identity almost from the moment he entered the world. He spent years chasing the kind of Hollywood breakthrough that always seemed close enough to touch but never stable enough to trust. He eventually entered one of television's biggest shows, only to describe himself as deeply unhappy once he got there. He struggled with prescription drugs. He received an HIV diagnosis during an era when the disease carried terrifying levels of fear, misinformation, and public stigma. Then, instead of disappearing completely from public view, he made a revelation about his sexuality that could have severely damaged an actor's career at that time. And in the final chapter of his life, he increasingly spoke about faith, mortality, and helping other people facing devastating illnesses. So do I agree with the idea that Dak Rambo's story is simply a tragic Hollywood tale filled with shocking secrets? Only partly. There was tragedy. There were secrets. There were rumors. There were painful revelations. But reducing Dak Rambo to scandal would miss what may be the most important part of his life. His story is ultimately about identity. Who are you when the person who understood you most is suddenly gone? Who are you when the career you dreamed about doesn't make you happy? Who are you when the public knows one version of you but your private reality is very different? And most importantly, who do you become when you realize that your time may be limited? Those are the questions that make Dak Rambo's life worth examining. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, share it with another classic television fan, and subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to continue making deeper stories about the fascinating people behind the entertainment industry. And stay with me until the end, because Dak Rambo's final years may completely change the way you see the man behind the television image. Before there was Dak Rambo, television star, there was Norman Rambo. And before Norman learned anything about Hollywood, acting, fame, or celebrity, he learned what it meant to share life with someone who seemed almost like another version of himself. Norman was born in California in 1941. He had a twin brother named Orman. They grew up as part of a family with 4 children, living a life far removed from the television studios that would eventually become central to Dak's identity. Their childhood included farm work. Fields had to be worked. Cows had to be milked. Responsibilities did not disappear just because 2 young men dreamed about something larger than the life immediately surrounding them. And there is something important about beginning Dak Rambo's story here. Because celebrity biographies often begin with the moment someone becomes visible. The audition. The first contract. The breakthrough role. But the personality that eventually walks onto a Hollywood soundstage was usually formed years earlier. Dak and his twin grew up doing physical work. They understood routine. They understood responsibility. But they also understood something else that only twins can completely understand: shared identity. A twin relationship can create a psychological closeness that outsiders find difficult to imagine. From childhood, other people compare you. They notice similarities. They notice differences. They say your names together. They speak about you as a pair. And Norman and Orman's names were so similar that even the brothers eventually became frustrated. Only one letter separated them. So as they grew older, they decided to redefine themselves. Norman became Dak. Orman became Durk. It may seem like a small decision. But psychologically, it is fascinating. Choosing a name is choosing how you want the world to encounter you. Most people inherit their names and never seriously question them. These brothers effectively said, "We can decide who we become." That act of self-reinvention would fit perfectly with Hollywood. Hollywood is a city built on reinvention. People changed their names, their clothes, their voices, their biographies, their public personalities. They arrive as unknowns and attempt to manufacture a version of themselves that the world will remember. Dak and Durk were already practicing that idea before they had careers. They were farm boys who believed they could become actors. And eventually, the dream became too powerful to ignore. The twins left the familiar world of home and headed toward Los Angeles. Imagine that journey emotionally. Two brothers. Same age. Similar faces. Same dream. Neither one knowing what would happen. Neither one knowing whether the entertainment industry would reject them immediately. But they had something many struggling actors do not have. They had each other. Failure feels different when someone is failing beside you. Fear feels different when someone else understands exactly why you are afraid. Dak did not enter Hollywood alone. That fact matters enormously because years later, he would be forced to continue without the one person who had been there from the beginning. There is a special kind of frustration in being almost successful. Complete failure can sometimes create clarity. If nobody hires you, eventually you may decide to change careers. If your business makes no money, you know there is a serious problem. But what happens when you succeed just enough to believe the breakthrough is coming? That can keep someone chasing for decades. Dak Rambo's career contained many moments that looked like they might become the turning point. A starring western. A movie opportunity. Guest roles on popular television programs. Soap operas. Recurring characters. New series. Again and again, he entered productions that seemed capable of taking him to another level. Again and again, the promise was temporary. He appeared in shows such as Wonder Woman, Charlie's Angels, and The Love Boat. These were recognizable television programs. The work kept his face in front of audiences. It kept him employed. But guest appearances do not always satisfy an actor who believes he should be carrying a series. This is something people outside entertainment often misunderstand. From a viewer's perspective, appearing on major television shows looks like success. From the actor's perspective, comparison can destroy that feeling. You see another performer becoming a household name. You remember when both of you were auditioning. Now their face is on billboards. You are waiting for another call from your agent. Objectively, you may be doing better than 99% of aspiring actors. Subjectively, you may feel like you are losing. Success is frequently relative. This happens everywhere. A person earns a good salary but feels poor because their friends earn more. A creator has 50,000 subscribers but feels unsuccessful because another creator has 5 million. An athlete reaches the professional level but feels disappointed because they are sitting on the bench. Dak had achieved something extraordinary. He had escaped the farm. He had worked in television. He had become recognizable. Yet the enormous breakthrough remained elusive. He spent a short period on All My Children. Then came a recurring role on Fantasy Island. Again, the pieces were there. Experience. Looks. Television familiarity. A professional network. But careers are not mathematical equations. Sometimes all the ingredients exist and the result still does not become what you expected. Then came another opportunity. A glossy primetime drama called Paper Dolls. This one looked promising. The cast included established names. The fashion world setting offered glamour. Primetime soaps were attracting viewers. Dak played Wesley Harper. Perhaps this would finally become the stable television identity he had been chasing. But once again, forces outside an actor's control interfered. Scheduling problems and competition hurt the show. It was cancelled quickly. Another opportunity disappeared. Another potential breakthrough became another line on a resume. How many times can someone rebuild hope before disappointment starts changing their personality? That question matters because repeated uncertainty has psychological consequences. It can create anxiety. It can make people desperate. It can encourage manipulation. It can make someone believe the next opportunity has to work because emotionally they cannot tolerate another failure. By the mid-1980s, Dak Rambo seems to have reached exactly that point. He needed to decide what he really wanted. And the answer was surprisingly specific. He wanted Dallas. Dallas was not an obscure television program. It was a major primetime phenomenon. For an actor who had spent years moving between temporary roles and cancelled projects, joining an established hit must have looked like entering a fortress. Finally, a show that already had an audience. Finally, something viewers recognized immediately. Finally, perhaps, stability. Dak reportedly told stories later about how aggressively he pursued the opportunity. He described scheming and maneuvering to convince the people behind the show that he belonged there. Some viewers might hear that and think negatively. But consider the emotional context. He had already spent years waiting for other people to decide his future. At some point, passive hope becomes unbearable. Dak decided to push. And it worked. He became Jack Ewing on Dallas. From the outside, this should have been the victory. This should have been the moment where the struggle made sense. The farm boy had reached one of American television's biggest stages. The twin who had endured devastating loss had survived. The actor whose promising shows kept disappearing had finally joined a proven hit. But there is one problem with dreams. We usually experience them first in imagination. And imagination removes all unpleasant details. You imagine getting the role. You do not imagine difficult personalities on set. You imagine the salary. You do not imagine waking up anxious every morning. You imagine recognition. You do not imagine feeling like an outsider. Dak later suggested that joining the established cast was uncomfortable. The show had already developed its social structure. Relationships existed. History existed. He entered late. Anyone who has joined a workplace where everyone else has known one another for years may understand this feeling. You enter the room and everyone already has stories. Inside jokes. Alliances. Old conflicts. Unspoken rules. Nobody necessarily has to say, "You don't belong." You can feel it anyway. Dak apparently did. And this is where his story becomes painfully relevant to ordinary life. How many people have fought for a job only to discover they hate being there? How many people have spent years trying to earn a promotion and then realized the promotion brought more anxiety than satisfaction? How many people have believed, if I can just get there, I'll finally be happy? Then they get there. And happiness doesn't arrive. This is one of adulthood's most destabilizing experiences. Failure hurts. But achieving your goal and still feeling empty can hurt in a completely different way. Failure allows you to believe happiness exists somewhere ahead. Achievement without happiness forces you to reconsider the map. Dak reportedly began relying on prescription drugs during this period. He associated the problem with his unhappiness on the show. That does not mean one workplace alone explains addiction or dependency. Human behavior is more complicated. But his own description suggests he was looking for escape. And escape is a powerful word. People use many things to escape. Alcohol. Drugs. Food. Work. Shopping. Gambling. Sex. Social media. Even excessive exercise. The behavior differs. The psychological objective is often similar. For a little while, I don't want to feel what I'm feeling. That should make us more compassionate when examining addiction. It does not erase responsibility. But shame alone rarely explains or repairs the problem. Dak had achieved something millions of aspiring actors wanted. Yet internally, he was struggling. This is why you should never judge another person's emotional life purely by their resume. Some of the saddest people in the world have impressive business cards. There is something profound about mortality. When people believe they have unlimited time, they tolerate enormous amounts of dishonesty. They postpone difficult conversations. They remain in situations they dislike. They delay apologies. They hide parts of themselves. They tell themselves, one day I will tell them. One day I will change careers. One day I will repair the relationship. One day I will live more authentically. Then mortality becomes real. Suddenly, one day, stops sounding like a plan. Dak Rambo's HIV diagnosis appears to have changed how he presented himself publicly. He spoke about his sexuality. He discussed the illness. He became involved with spiritual and charitable efforts. We should be careful not to romanticize terminal illness. Disease does not automatically make someone enlightened. Pain is not valuable simply because it is painful, but awareness of death can force clarity. There is a famous psychological idea sometimes described as a second life, beginning when a person realizes they only have one. You stop living as though rehearsal will continue forever. Dak had spent much of his professional life performing characters written by other people. In the final stage of his life, he increasingly had to speak as himself. There is enormous symbolism in that. For decades, other people controlled the lines. Now he had to decide what he wanted to say. The source describes Dak becoming increasingly involved with Christian faith during his final years. He reportedly prayed with evangelist Ronnie Pierce. They appeared in religious settings. Dak eventually said that he wanted to be remembered as a man of God. People respond to serious illness in dramatically different ways. Some become angry at religion. Some discover religion. Some become more philosophical. Some become intensely practical. Some desperately seek alternative treatments. Some withdraw. Some become more social. There is no single correct emotional response to mortality. Dak appears to have leaned toward faith. It gave him a framework for understanding what was happening. And perhaps that is one of religion's oldest psychological functions. Human beings know we will die. We are probably the only creatures capable of spending decades worrying about something that has not happened yet. Religion offers language for that fear. Continuation. Meaning. Purpose. Forgiveness. Hope. Whether a viewer shares Dak's beliefs is not necessary to understand why they matter to him. The mature approach to biography is not asking, do I believe what he believed? The better question is, what did that belief allow him to face? Dak reportedly said he was not afraid of death. He described it in terms suggesting another journey or adventure. We cannot know exactly what he felt during every private moment. Public courage and private fear can coexist. But even expressing that perspective reveals an attempt to transform death from an enemy into a transition. That is psychologically powerful. And he did something else. He tried to help others. Dak helped establish the Dak Rambo Healing Foundation, intended to support people dealing with life-threatening illness. This part of his story deserves far more attention than rumors about his private relationships. Because suffering presents every person with a choice. Not a simple choice. Not an easy one. But a real choice. Pain can make us smaller. Or pain can expand our empathy. Someone who has never been terrified by a medical diagnosis may struggle to understand a person waiting for test results. Someone who has been there understands the silence of that waiting room differently. A person who has experienced grief hears another grieving person differently. A person who has lost everything may recognize panic behind someone else's eyes before anyone else notices. Suffering can create a language. Dak had experienced devastating loss long before HIV entered his life. He had lost his twin brother. He had endured career frustration. He had struggled emotionally. Now illness placed him inside another community of frightened people. Rather than focusing entirely on himself, he attempted to provide support. That does not erase mistakes. Charitable work should never be used as a magic eraser for someone's entire life. But it reveals something meaningful about where Dak's attention was moving near the end. Toward service. There is an important lesson here. You may not be able to choose what happened to you. But you can sometimes choose what the experience becomes useful for. A person who grew up poor may later mentor disadvantaged children. A survivor of addiction may help people in recovery. Someone who lost a spouse may volunteer with grieving families. Someone who struggled academically may become the teacher who notices the child everyone else has written off. This does not make the original suffering worth it. That phrase can feel cruel. But meaning can be created from pain even when the pain itself was unnecessary or unfair. Dak's foundation represented an attempt to do exactly that. His illness was destroying his body. But he could still decide how to use his remaining public voice. Then Dak's story collided with one of celebrity culture's darkest institutions, the tabloid press. A reporter later described receiving information from an anonymous medical source claiming that a famous television actor was gravely ill. The source account identifies reporter William Keck and describes payments offered for private information about Dak's condition. This raises serious ethical questions. A dying man's medical condition became commercially valuable information. Think about the moral distortion required for that to happen. One person is losing their life. Another person sees a headline. A hospital room becomes a location for profit. Private suffering becomes content. The situation reportedly became even worse. According to the later account, reporters attempted to reach Dak at the medical facility. When they arrived, he was no longer there. Yet an article was eventually published presenting what appeared to be a final interview. Keck later wrote that the interview had been fabricated and said he had not participated in inventing it. If that account is accurate, it represents something deeply disturbing. A dying person can no longer protect their voice. They cannot correct the quote. They cannot explain context. Eventually, they cannot deny the story at all. Death creates vulnerability. That is why responsible journalism should become more careful, not less careful. This incident also raises a question that remains relevant today. How much privacy does a celebrity deserve? Some people argue, they chose fame. But choosing acting is not choosing unlimited public ownership. A performer sells performances. Not every medical record. Not every bedroom detail. Not every family conversation. Not every dying moment. Modern social media has made this boundary even more complicated. Audiences now expect constant access. What are you eating? Who are you dating? Why did you unfollow that person? Why did you gain weight? Are you sick? Are you pregnant? Are you getting divorced? A famous person may be surrounded by millions of strangers who believe watching them creates entitlement to them. Dak's final illness demonstrates how destructive that entitlement can become. There is a difference between public interest and public curiosity. The two are often confused. Dak Rambo died on March 21, 1994. He was 52 years old. 52. Think about how young that sounds. Many people at 52 are changing careers. Raising teenagers. Planning retirement decades away. Traveling. Starting businesses. Falling in love again. Dak's life ended while there were almost certainly still roles he could have played, people he could have known, conversations he could have had. He was buried beside his twin brother Durk. That final detail brings the story into a devastating circle. Two boys grow up together. They work together. Dream together. Rename themselves together. Leave home together. Enter Hollywood together. Then one dies young. The other continues for nearly 3 more decades. And eventually, they are buried beside one another. You could write a fictional screenplay with that ending and audiences might accuse the writer of making the symbolism too obvious. But life does not worry about subtlety. Dak spent years learning how to exist without his twin. In death, the brothers were reunited geographically. We cannot know what Dak believed that reunion meant spiritually, but given his later religious outlook, one can imagine that the idea may have carried meaning for him. Dak Rambo's story raises an interesting question about courage. Hollywood usually portrays bravery physically. The cowboy draws the gun. The soldier runs into danger. The detective confronts the criminal. Dak played characters inside genres built around visible masculine courage. But some of the bravest moments of his real life involved words. I have HIV. I am bisexual. Those statements may sound simple now. They were not simple then. Courage is contextual. Publicly confronting a disease associated with enormous stigma required vulnerability. Talking about sexuality required vulnerability. Discussing mortality required vulnerability. And perhaps this offers a better definition of courage than many movies provide. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is deciding that something matters more than hiding. Sometimes courage looks like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like confession. Sometimes it looks like asking for help. Sometimes it looks like saying, I can't continue pretending. This is an especially important message for men. Many cultures teach men that strength means concealment. Hide fear. Hide weakness. Hide illness. Hide emotional dependency. Hide uncertainty. Then men wonder why they feel isolated. Dak's life demonstrates the cost of image. The handsome actor had been marketed as an idealized man. Near the end, he became publicly more complicated. And therefore, in some ways, more human. And so we return to the image of two young brothers. Dak and Durk. Two farm boys with nearly identical names. Two young men tired of being Norman and Norman. Two dreamers who renamed themselves because they believed identity could be chosen. They packed their lives into a dream and headed for Los Angeles. They studied. They struggled. They went to church because their aunt insisted. And through one of those strange accidents of fate, television found them. For a moment, the future must have seemed unlimited. They were young. They were handsome. They were together. Hollywood was opening. Then one February day in 1967, that future shattered. Durk died. Dak continued. And perhaps those two words summarize more human courage than most of us realize. Dak continued. When his first shows disappeared, he continued. When the breakthrough kept slipping away, he continued. When paper dolls failed, he continued. When he entered Dallas and discovered that success could still feel lonely, he continued. When he struggled with prescription medication, he continued. When a doctor told him he had HIV, he continued. But something changed. The final Dak Rambo was not simply the young actor chasing a starring role. He began speaking more openly, about who he was. About illness. About faith. About mortality. About helping people. And maybe this is where his story becomes larger than television. Because eventually every one of us faces a moment when performance stops working. You can perform confidence for your coworkers. You can perform happiness for your family. You can perform success on social media. You can tell everyone that everything is fine. But there will come a moment when life asks you a question that cannot be answered with performance. Who are you really? Dak spent much of his career speaking lines written by someone else. Near the end, life forced him to find his own words. He could have disappeared. He could have denied everything. He could have allowed shame to swallow the final years. Instead, he told the public he was living with HIV. He told the public he was bisexual. In the cultural environment of 1991, those were not trivial statements. They exposed him to judgment. But they also released him from part of the burden of hiding. And perhaps that is what courage really looks like. Not always a heroic act accompanied by music. Sometimes courage is simply becoming more truthful when lying would be easier. Dak also moved toward faith. Some viewers will understand that instinct immediately. Others will not. That's okay. You do not need to share someone's theology to understand the emotional power of believing that death is not the final humiliation. Dak reportedly wanted to be remembered as a man of God. He helped create a foundation for people facing life-threatening illnesses. The heartthrob was becoming something else. The man who had spent years being admired for how he looked was trying to decide what he wanted to mean. That transformation matters. Because appearance disappears. Fame fades. Television shows stop airing. Magazine covers turn yellow. The younger generation asks, who was that? But the effect you have on another human being can continue quietly for decades. Sherry J. Wilson remembered walking onto Dallas frightened. Dak knew what being an outsider felt like. He could have ignored her. Instead, he comforted her. Years later, she remembered. That may be the simplest and most beautiful detail in his story. A man can spend years chasing a television role because he believes success will create legacy. Then one sentence spoken kindly to a nervous person becomes part of the legacy too. Think about that. You do not need fame to create something that lasts. You do not need millions of dollars. You do not need an award. Somebody may remember the day you helped them when nobody else noticed they were struggling. Somebody may remember the teacher who told them they weren't stupid. The friend who answered the phone. The doctor who sat down instead of rushing away. The stranger who showed compassion. The parent who finally apologized. The partner who stayed during the worst night. Legacy is built in these moments. Dak's story is tragic. There is no way around that word. A twin brother killed young. A career filled with instability. A dream role that became emotionally painful. Addiction struggles. An HIV diagnosis during one of the most frightening periods of the AIDS crisis. Death at only 52. Yes. That is tragedy. But tragedy is not the entire story. Because tragedy tells us what happened to someone. Character tells us what they did afterward. Durk died. Dak continued. His shows failed. Dak continued. His health collapsed. Dak continued. And eventually, he used the remaining time to speak, believe, help, and prepare himself for an ending he knew was coming. That does not make the ending happy. It makes it meaningful. And perhaps the greatest lesson from Dak Rambo's life is not about Hollywood at all. It is about time. You are spending your life right now. Not tomorrow. Not when you finally get the promotion. Not when you become famous. Not when you lose 10 pounds. Not when you have more money. Not when the perfect person enters your life. Now. This is the life. Dak spent years pursuing the next role. Many of us do the same thing in different costumes. We say, when I earn more, I'll relax. When I buy the house, I'll be happy. When I get married, I'll feel complete. When my channel grows, I'll finally feel successful. When everyone respects me, I'll stop doubting myself. Then time passes. And eventually we discover that life was happening during the waiting. So chase the dream. Dak Rambo learned that in the hardest possible way. But you can influence what you do with the time that remains. One day, every resume ends. Every career ends. Every television series ends. Every audience goes home. And after all the applause, the question becomes extraordinarily simple. Who were you when there was nothing left to perform? Were you kind? Were you honest? Did people feel safer because you were there? Did you allow fear to define you? Or did you eventually become brave enough to live more truthfully? Dak Rambo's life does not give us perfect answers. No human life does, but it gives us questions worth carrying. And perhaps that is a better legacy than perfection. Dak once shared Hollywood dreams with a twin brother. Decades later, he was buried beside that brother. Between those two moments was an entire life. Television. Fame. Loss. Disappointment. secrets, love, fear, illness, faith, kindness, and courage. Not a perfect life. A human one. And the same is true for every person watching. Your story contains chapters you wish you could rewrite. Everyone's does. Maybe you lost years. Maybe you hurt somebody. Maybe somebody hurt you. Maybe you chose the wrong career. Maybe you hid who you were because you were afraid people would leave. Maybe you reached the dream and discovered it wasn't enough. None of that means the story is finished. As long as you are here, another choice remains. Another honest conversation. Another act of kindness. Another attempt. Another opportunity to stop performing and begin living. That is the powerful truth hidden inside Dak Rambo's tragic story. We cannot choose every chapter. But while the book remains open, we can still influence what the next page says. So if there is something you need to say, say it. If there is someone you need to forgive, consider it. If there is a dream you genuinely believe in, stop waiting for perfect conditions. And if you are carrying pain, remember that surviving it may someday allow you to become the person who understands someone else when nobody else does. Dak Rambo spent years being remembered as a handsome television star. But perhaps the more meaningful way to remember him is this: he was a man who endured devastating loss. He struggled. He searched. He stumbled. And when darkness moved closer, he tried to turn toward honesty, faith, and service. That is more complicated than a Hollywood heartthrob. And far more human. If this story moved you, please give the video a like, share it with someone who remembers Dak Rambo or loves classic television history, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply researched stories about the people behind Hollywood's most unforgettable faces. And before you leave, I want to ask you one final question. If you knew you had only a few years left, what would you stop pretending about today? Thank you for watching. Take care of the people you love. Take care of the time you have. And I'll see you in the next story.